Jane, are we making more progress towards happiness in your view?
I think we're learning how to design systems that make people happy, but I'm not sure we're building them in the right places. I think that we are learning how to give people positive emotions and create meaningful social connections, but maybe we haven't evolved that learning quite far enough yet so that we're doing it in our schools and in our churches and in our neighborhoods.
That presumes that people have never been happy in the past, though. You're saying we haven't developed those systems yet to make people truly happy. Do you think
I'm fascinated by, my PhD is in performance studies, and a lot of what we look at is ritual and society and what societies have done throughout history to bond and come together. And I think one of the reasons why we need to focus on putting happiness back into the real world is that our technologies have, and our kind of work lives, the way we've designed our work lives, have taken us out of the traditional face-to-face community, the traditional sense of ritual and celebration and play with people that we know and people that we don't know. Historically, the ancient Greeks had a lot of really cool ideas about happiness that I think are important to look throughout history to find rituals and games that people played to bring more happiness to real life.
But it does raise a question for me about what our natural default state is. Are we predisposed to be happy or sad or nothing?
Well, not being a scientist, being more of a literary person, I can go back to that old theory of the four humors. In the ancient world, Middle Ages, and Renaissance, it was thought that there were four humors: the sanguine humor, the optimistic humor, the choleric humor, yellow bile, the phlegmatic humor, and the melancholy humor, black bile. And the idea was that each person was born with a kind of disposition toward one of those four humors. Obviously, that's not good science, but I think from what I know that science has kind of borne out that people are kind of genetically wired to be melancholy or optimistic, and I think I'm certainly wired to be melancholy. So I think it really depends on your genetic luck or good luck or bad luck, as far as I can tell.
Do you know why you're predisposed to melancholy?
Do I know why?
Yeah. Are your parents that way? Is that why you are?
Well, again, this is the great question. Is it DNA or is it my environment? Most say it's a combination of the two, that I was born with a kind of melancholy disposition, and because I grew up in the environment I grew up in, that it kind of catalyzed my melancholy and brought it out and made me the gloriously gloomy person I now am.
Okay,
Eric, I want to play games with you.
But yeah, I think Eric is quite right to point out to some extent to the fact that there are genetic dispositions that create differences. That some people are just more the cheerful, smiley person by nature, and it would be hard for them to not be. And for other people, it would be a constant struggle and effort to put on that smile, and they're actually happy if they don't have to do it and are left alone. So that's just, but in general, human beings are disposed to be happy. Most of the time when people are asked, how do you feel? They do actually feel happy.
That's their default position.
And that's the default. Nevertheless, of course, we have the disposition to react with strong negative emotion when things are going badly in our lives, and even more with more positive affect when things are going well. That helps us steer and plan and make the right choices in our life, like pleasure and pain as the guiding forces. But in the default, when we're not doing much, nature fortunately made us typically happier.
Jane, I have seen you quoted as having said we need games in our life the same way we need soap in our life.
Yes.
We need it everywhere. Everywhere. What do you mean?
Yeah, that analogy comes from the idea that people were making soap in all the ancient civilizations, but it wasn't until the 20th century that we actually realized that soap kills germs, and so it could save lives, right? So I have this headline from a 1931 Los Angeles Times edition where the headline is "Soap Kills Germs." And if you look at games, we've been playing games since human beings were evolved. And yet it's taken us until the 21st century to learn that games kill social alienation, and they kill boredom, and they kill depression. When you're playing a game, you're not suffering. And so for me, if we could not suffer in more places, if we could have games for planes so that I'm not scared when I'm on a plane, if we could have games in schools where some students feel stupid and feel like they can't succeed, and then we could have less suffering there. Games in hospitals, games, as I said, in cemeteries. I think now that we know that games can ease suffering, we can start to spread them throughout society in the same way that when we finally realized soap kills germs, we started to make it part of every building that we build and every place that we inhabit. We should do the same thing with games.
I don't want to take this analogy to too ridiculous an extent, but some people argue that having so much soap in the world is making us sicker because the body needs contact with viruses and germs, or else we lose our immunity to all of these things.
And it's also been commercialized, and everyone's selling you soap now.
There you go.
Well,
there you go.
I would love to get to the point in society where we have so many games that we start to need to play less. That would be a happy day for me. I'm willing to go there. Then we can scale back.
I'm just kidding. This is completely apropos, almost totally apropos of nothing, but I'm trying to imagine how the pitch meeting went, Jane, when you went into the company and said, I got this idea for a game that people are going to play in cemeteries, and it's going to make them happy. How did that go exactly?
Well, it's interesting because I was working with both a video game development company and the cemeteries. And the cemeteries love the idea because they struggle to get people to come and use the space, and they lose their funding, and cemeteries get sold. And so they were like, please bring live bodies here and give them something to do. The video game company, it was fascinating. You know, this idea that video gamers are desensitized to death and violence. They love this sort of creative twist. You know, you can have this experience of killing people in a game, but then you have to go pay your respects in real cemeteries. It was for a Western, a cowboy game. So you could go to the real American cemeteries where these characters were actually killed because they were real living cowboys. And you have to pay your respects. And it just was this weird creative idea that they liked of blurring that line between having to think about, you know, what you're doing in the game and the real world. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, people are happier playing this game.
I think so. I mean, I continue to get emails from people who continue to play Tombstone Hold'em when they're in cemeteries for, you know, in their real lives for mourning and stuff. It gives you something to do and to be present in a space that otherwise is very hard to be in.
Eric is trying to make life more game-like. A good idea.
Well, I go back to a great thought of one of my psychological heroes, Carl Jung, who says that neurosis leads to knowledge of self. When we are neurotic, we are uneasy in relation to the status quo. We're uneasy in relation to convention. We're kind of agitated. We're not playful at all. And when we feel that way, we kind of turn inward and explore parts of ourselves we wouldn't explore otherwise, and eventually kind of dip down into what Jung called the unconscious. And there indeed find powers that we were not aware of before, and we can bring those forward and actually live richer lives. I fear that if we kind of overemphasize play, ritual, artifice, activities that can kind of smooth over the rough spots of life, that we might have a paradigm in which we move away from this idea that agitation isn't such a bad thing, but indeed might be a kind of vital force of life.